Well, good morning, everybody. My name is David Durbin. I'm Senior Vice President for CLO Talent. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first HRO event. And so quick observation from the top is the genuine and very authentic nature by which you all cooperate and partner is refreshing to see. So for those of us who support you or have supported you in other environments, when we get together, and we tend to do it as without clients in the room, and we talk about what clients are thinking, it's nice to be in the room to hear you all talk actually about what you're thinking, and it makes hopefully us a better partner. So it's a pleasure to be here. As Elliot said, I spent a lifetime before this lifetime in radio for 10 years, and one of the things that they teach you is you don't need to look good, you just need to sound good, and there are a lot of people who give us scripts. And the thing they told us was, we don't need your editorial commentary, shut up and read, was often what we heard. So I trust those two smart gentlemen in the back that we're going to bring up. And guys, why don't you kind of come on up now. Chris Nichols, who's VP of Marketing from Indivus, and Steve O'Brien, who's President Talent Solutions at Job.com. And this session is titled, Your TA Strategy Sucks. So they're clearly smart people, and they're going to tell you why, but more importantly, they're going to tell you how to fix the fact that your TA strategy sucks. So gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. I will say that if you have to have quest cares for your actions last night, your strategy definitely does suck. Let's start there. Luckily, what we're going to be talking today about is a little less about the fact that your strategy probably doesn't actually suck. So we hope that this conversation can be valuable to you as you are going through the planning process for next year, but also how you reevaluate yourself as an organization throughout the year. And so, again, I'm Chris Nichols, Vice President of Marketing at Indivus. Steve O'Brien is here with me today from Job.com. Indivus is now powered by Job.com. Several months back, Job.com acquired our organization, and it's very exciting to be here today with him. And these speakers are everywhere. So we're going to go on a quick journey. Steve and I are both fast talkers. He's from the Northeast, I'm from the Midwest. So hopefully you all can keep up. But we will leave time at the end for questions, because I think this is an interesting topic, and I hope that you all will enjoy. So, Steve, do you want to provide any color around your strategy sucks?
Yeah, shame on you. We have no idea if your strategy sucks. We thought this would be an interesting prompt because some of us might be hearing this right now. The labor markets are bananas. Talent acquisition is one of those things that everybody's got an opinion about. Right? Everybody's an expert. Here's what you need to be focused on. You need to think over here. Your strategy sucks. Or the outcomes aren't what we want. You need to review your strategy. Like, you've got no idea. Right? I mean, so how do we navigate all of the polarized and charged opinions of folks that come in wanting to help, but sometimes leaving us in a position that is difficult to navigate conversationally, and to peel the rhetoric apart, and to take that what's probably positive energy and drive it towards what most of us all share is a hope to improve the talent acquisition outcomes. So this, I don't know if your strategy sucks.
It probably doesn't. It probably doesn't. So these are the kind of the three main bullet points that we're going to talk through today. You're not going to see individual slides laid out to these topics because the entire conversation hits upon each of them. And so when we think about the fact that oftentimes as leaders, we end up spending a lot of our time managing other people's opinions and feelings about the work that we're doing. It doesn't seem to matter the size of the organization. Oftentimes we get executive pressure that is based upon the feelings that they are portraying, or through a conversation that was had amongst leaders about the work that's being done. Talent acquisition is facing both a blessing and a curse today. It's never been more important, but it's never had more scrutiny than it has at this moment in time. I heard Johnny C. Taylor, the president of SHRM, speak a couple of weeks ago, and it was an HR conference as well, and he put up on the screen that winning the talent war is the most important thing that you can do over the next 3 years, which that was a business goal. The most important business goal over the next 3 years that you can win is the talent war. So there's so much pressure now that's being pushed down from the C-suite around how we drive better outcomes, which is led through executing our tactics. How we spend our recruiting time. Are we doing it by managing paperwork? Are we doing it by interviews and filling out offer forms? Or are we in fact driving outcomes? Because there's a difference at the end of the day in outcomes versus activities. And finally, are we meeting the market where it's at? Things are moving very quickly when it comes to how candidates engage with our organizations, how they engage with recruiters. And so are we meeting candidates where they're at? Are we making it easy for them to engage in the hiring process with our organization? And look, this is a healthcare conference. Nurses are hard enough to find. Are we making it easy for them throughout the process? Because we need them a lot more than they need us. And I think that we all feel that pressure. Yeah. Can I get an amen? There we go. So we have two illustrations here and some good stories. So Steve, do you mind telling this first story about this Northeast U.S. health system?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll offer, and the reason we wanted to tell some stories is Chris and I recognize we may have a sampling bias. We don't think that we do, but the work that we do is to come in when people think that somebody's TA strategy sucks. So if we're thinking that a lot of opinions are floating around in this space, it's partly because that's what we get called in to help with. And I thought that there'd be two interesting stories that actually came through within the last, let's say, 12 months that illustrate that the leadership team started with your TA strategy sucks, but may have really misunderstood why the criticism existed. So one is actually we came in after Deloitte did a study. Deloitte studies are expensive. If you've got Deloitte dollars to spend, God bless you. If Deloitte's here, I'd like to learn about pricing from you. They came in and they did a $750,000 study, and the only reason I know is because I'm friends from days gone by with the consultant that did this study. So here was the problem. It's a large healthcare system, and they had gotten feedback from their operating committee, which was a team of executives, that talent acquisition wasn't doing a good job. They were very dissatisfied with talent acquisition. It's that kind of sort of low resolution criticism that leaves you wondering, like, this is cool. I get that you feel that way. Like, what's that anchored on, and what are we going to do about it? But we didn't get there, right? We got to talent acquisition needs to be reviewed, and we're going to spend Deloitte dollars. So Deloitte comes in and does a review that leads to these kind of what I would call sort of boilerplate insights. It's not Deloitte's fault. It happens in talent acquisition all the time. We need to improve candidate experience. We need to drive down time to fill, and we need to improve quality of hire, right? We've probably all looked at those metrics. That might be the metrics that we look at. Now, those are not bad things to drive or accomplish or to pursue, but that wasn't the premise of the conversation. It wasn't, are these things good? The premise of the conversation was, what you're doing isn't good because we need to do these things. So they go off and they do all of their work and they put a whole bunch of pressure on talent acquisition because they spent the money on the Deloitte dollars, not resources for talent acquisition. So now talent acquisition gets the revelation that the Deloitte has solved the problem. You need to work harder, ladies and gentlemen, right? You're like, okay. So talent acquisition sort of figures out how we're going to do more with less or the same, and accomplishes the impossible, right? If any of us are in talent acquisition, we're sort of like the Marines. You figure it out. I don't know how we're going to get it done. We need more with less, and we're going to do it. So Deloitte comes back and does another follow-up study to say, how we doing, right? Talent acquisition time to fill came down, quality went up, candidate experience improved, The operating committee says, talent acquisition still sucks. Like, gee whiz, okay. So they do a study, right, with the actual sort of critics to sit down and do some one-on-one feedback. Turns out the talent acquisition sucks because they launched an internal executive search practice a year ago that doesn't feel like working with Korn Ferry. So talent acquisition sucks. Right? That's really exhausting and frustrating, right? Not only for the TA leader that just spent a whole bunch of time on this rabbit trail of accomplishing things that are all admirable and good, but weren't why talent acquisition sucks. Your criticism has nothing to do with what I do, and in that last year, while the market's all jacked up and wild, we put a whole bunch of pressure on our recruiters, and they might have felt undefended. That's not great. So the point isn't don't do great things, it isn't don't pressurize your recruiters, but when somebody comes and says your talent acquisition strategy sucks, it's worth saying, what do you mean, and how do you know? Before you spend the Deloitte dollars and before you squeeze the heads of all your recruiters. So that's one experience that we're sort of coming to this with, saying, hey, this happens, and we want to unpack, like, how does this happen and what tools are available to us to sort of navigate and to stand our ground and to not cave to the pressure, which is real, and to force and push for clarity as we then are going to cascade the priorities to our talent acquisition teams that are already stressed and that are already working long hours and that are already having respiratory therapists in Pennsylvania saying, I would like $1 million infinite dollars. And your finance department says, denied, and the recruiter has to figure it out. So that's story one.
Story two, how many of you have been through an acquisition in the last 2 or 3 years where your company was acquired or you acquired another company? That makes sense because the market right now is as hot as it possibly can be. And I have the luxury of living in Nashville, and Nashville is the healthcare capital of the world for for-profit healthcare. So I have a lot of friends through the Nashville Healthcare Council, and they're constantly going through this barrage of, like, how do we onboard these new companies? And I'll be honest, healthcare is seemingly extremely hard because every time they acquire a new company, they're all using systems that are 25 years old, and nobody can put the technology together. Right? And this is not uncommon as well in talent acquisition of, hey, we have these applicant tracking systems and we do this way. And so this is actually a supplier to the healthcare industry, but we've all been through acquisitions and mergers. And so I think that there's a lot of similarities that you'll find here. 33% headcount growth. So organization grows by a lot of people. The challenge here as well is that other system that they just bought had multiple cultures as well. Right, which is something that we see often in healthcare as all of these roll-ups have begun to occur. It's, hey, we have 3 regional health systems over here, and we have 3 more up here in Oklahoma and 3 in Washington, and somehow we're supposed to all be the same now, which is not the most effective way to acquire new businesses. There needs to be an integration process. And so leadership at this particular organization decided that talent acquisition just wasn't strategic enough. Does anybody have any idea what not being strategic enough might mean? They didn't have enough leaders. They needed more management.
That's what
because
there.
More managers always equal more strategy, right? We need more people talking about the problems. We need more people trying to figure out the tactics because clearly the strategy, what we have isn't working. And so what this organization did was they added 3 layers of leadership in between the front line and the executive team, the operational leadership. And so what begins to happen is there's this significant discontent between what reality is and what other people's feelings are. And so often, again, we talk about these feelings in our strategies, and it becomes truth because we talk about them often enough. We talk about our problems enough that they're not based in reality. They're based in our emotions, and they're based upon things that we've heard. Right? Because I listened to a podcast, I did this or that, and now all these things come to fruition, and we don't have clear metrics that are laid out for everybody to see, and so all of a sudden, we weren't strategic enough, so we added the 3 layers. So the aha moment occurs at a moment in time when there's a challenge downstream where hiring managers not satisfied with the amount of candidates that they're getting. So that gets passed through the 3 levels of leadership to the recruiter that's working on the requisition. And the recruiter explains the problem to her manager. The manager begins to prepare a PowerPoint to give to her manager, who then is going to go do a presentation to the executive team about why this hiring manager is, in fact, unhappy. So it's kind of like playing the game of telephone as well as a kid, right? So this person says this, and this person over here says this, and then we're going to mush all the leadership in the middle, and we're going to find a solution. Well, the aha moment was, wait a second, is this really the problems that we're worrying about? Because they don't understand that the fact that the tactics weren't meeting the standards of the hiring manager. And so I'm sure that you all have seen layers of this type of thing get added into your organization. And so it's not necessarily, again, as Steve mentioned, your strategy probably doesn't suck, but it's asking ourselves the how and the whys of the questions around what does not being strategic enough actually mean? What a great slide to move to then at this point, Steve.
Yeah. So there's three things that we'd like to suggest, and hopefully this is an encouraging session for you guys from friends that understand that talent acquisition is nuts, offering you sort of tools, rhetorical and sometimes intellectual, to sort of penetrate the rhetoric. So one of the questions that we had said, if somebody criticizes your strategy, is what do you mean and how do you know? Another sort of principle that we'd offer sort of as encouragement is that bureaucratic drag is almost always wrong. Almost always. Not always wrong, but if anybody suggests we're adding more layers of management or the TA outcomes aren't what we want, so the answer is more bureaucratic drag, that's probably always wrong. Just as you go back to your offices. Now, if we don't get this right, if we don't sort of figure out where we're going to stand our ground and how we're going to fight for our staff and how we're going to fight for clarity rhetorically and how we're going to insist on disentangling strategy and tactics, you might get something like this in your email. And so this is a CEO, that attended a podcast that had a media kit that shot out a whole bunch of insight and wisdom about talent acquisition. And a lot of the helpers are well-intended, but not always well-educated about what it is that we're trying to do. And so they zip you across this file that says, hey, we've got a solution. We need to be talent acquisition because that's strategic, not recruiting because that's tactical. If you find yourself in this spider web of rhetoric and nonsense, you're going to have a hard time getting out. So knowing where you're standing your ground and how you're standing your ground, and knowing that you're going to gently receive the good intention, because rarely are you working with folks that are malicious in their efforts to help, but they come with this insight from some podcast that they heard about the difference between talent acquisition and recruiting, and here, I want you to think about this. If you spend time thinking about this, you're wasting your time. I'm sorry. My son, he's 6, he's learning everything in the world as 6-year-olds do, and he recently corrected me. I had called a roll bread. And he's like, Dad, that's not bread, that's a roll. You've got a distinction, bud, but I don't know there's much of a difference. You are correct. And he's 6, though, and I love him, and he's my son, right? And so it's, yeah, gotcha, bud, right? We are going to have some of this stuff as well in talent acquisition. Is there a difference between just being tactical and being strategic? Sure. But is the problem that we're facing as the markets are spinning out of control and regulatory therapists in Pennsylvania are requiring infinite dollars that you are tactical and you're doing recruitment and you're not strategic, you're not doing talent acquisition? I don't know. But the answer is probably no. That's probably not what's happening. So as we offer the encouragement to do this, it's so that you've got some ballast behind you. And we saw these 2 guys in Houston that said that I have warrant to stand my ground. And when somebody comes at me with this stuff, it's not malintent, right? It's not that your executive peers are trying to hurt, but it's that they don't really understand. And if we don't have a strong point of view in talent acquisition about what is the problem, and how is it that we're going to address it? And how is it that we're going to establish measurables and action plans? You will become a victim to other people's points of view, right? This is another encouragement that we offer. Avoid this. Or send it to somebody else and spin them up and let them waste their time on it. Okay, so this is a CHRO conference. Forgive sort of putting something up here that is relatively straightforward like this, but I always think that it's useful to clarify, especially if I'm criticizing rhetorical nonsense, to clarify what do I mean when I talk about this stuff. So I'm a young man that grew up in the trenches of recruiting. Like, I didn't have an MBA, I have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, I got lucky getting employed, right? Actually, I was going to law school until I met a woman, dropped out, chased her. Now, she is the mother of that 6-year-old that I love, so it worked out. But I am a humble guy to stand here. And so when I try and break this stuff down, I just want to be clear about what is it that I mean, right? So I see, in the way that I try and drive clarity when I'm consulting with somebody on these types of criticisms, because they start emotional and they start big and our strategy is wrong. Like, okay, you don't have to look at it this way, but strategies serve goals in my world, right? So what's your goal, right? Strategies are difficult to criticize because they tend to be big bets. Right? They tend to be nonlinear thinking. As they tend to be, here's the goal, here's the big bet. And then tactics are very easy to criticize. They're relatively derivative. Right? So here's the big bet, and here's all the derivative consequences of that big bet that I need to pull off. Right? And so as we're getting this criticism, talent acquisition isn't strategic, things aren't working right, when we ask the question, what do you mean and how do you know, it's good for us to have an answer in our pocket about what we mean and how we know, right? And so strategy serves a goal. What's the goal of the organization? What's the goal of talent acquisition? If you can't answer that, let's just calm down for a second. just for a second. Before we go peeling off the layers of the strategy, let's clarify what the goal is. Let's agree that strategy is a set of big bets that's going to drive that goal forward. And it's really difficult to know that the strategy's wrong. And it's not because you're not smart. It's because of the nature of strategy. It's a set of big bets and nonlinear thoughts. Now, maybe it is bad, and we can have that conversation, but let's just agree that that's what that is. And tactics are derivative, usually. And they're very easy to criticize, right? And so the repetition that I go through is, the goal is win the war. The strategy is take these two hills. The tactics is dry boots, dry ammo, the right number of soldiers, run supply lines, and keep them fed, right? Now, if somebody comes to you and says, you're losing the war, your strategy sucks, maybe. But if you find out that you don't have dry ammo and they're not fed on the front line, don't go picking different hills to take. Feed your soldiers and give them gunpowder, right? And so if we're going to start pulling back the layers on strategy and throwing grenades across departments and saying that, allied health is understaffed and we need more support and your strategy sucks, maybe. What do you mean and how do you know? And can we agree with what we mean when we say these things? What's the goal? Strategy is difficult to criticize, so tell me a little bit more about what you mean. And tactics are derivative. So let's take a look at the outcomes and the tactics that may not be producing the outcomes you're looking for, so that we can make sure that our energy and our Deloitte dollars goes to the right stuff. There you go.
You got to wait for everybody to get their Deloitte dollars, because I'm sure everybody wants
Well,
some of
I'm
those.
jealous, and I figure somebody's going to signal to me I've got them. And like, don't give them to Deloitte. Give them to me. All right. So here's a suggestion. You may or may not like this. I'm not selling this necessarily, but it is a point of view. And it's certainly a framework of thinking that I tend to offer for folks to start working on the way that we're going to build our language around our strategy for talent acquisition. So I had said on the last slide, strategy is a set of big bets. In talent acquisition, it almost always balances cost, quality, and time. Almost always. And so those are a set of strategic constraints, right? So your goal in talent acquisition might be hire 25% more staff next year, right? Your goal might be reduce agency utilization by 15%. It might be increase the percentage of your labor force that is full-time FTEs by 50%, right? Like here's a set of goals, right? Your strategy is going to be the big bets, right, on how do we pull that off, like take these two hills. And then within your strategy is going to be a set of constraints, right? Cost, quality, and speed. The reason I put this up here is to, again, offer an encouragement. Sometimes we do this to our staff. I do this to my staff. It's sort of the lighthearted pretending that conflict doesn't exist between competing goals, right? The old joke, well, I want all of them, right? Well, that's sort of a joke, though, right? I mean, every once in a while, you do get a earth-shattering innovation that collapses the tension between cost, quality, and speed. Amazon exists, Uber exists, right? I get that. I'm not saying that that thing doesn't happen, but most of the time, these are actually sort of adversarial objectives. And so as we're looking at our talent acquisition strategy, making sure that we have some buy-in from those that are our peer group executives on how are we balancing this, right? So we've got the goal, let's decrease agency utilization by 20%, right? We've got our strategy, our big bets. Well, when you're looking to put together your tactical plan to pull those strategies off, you've got to have some agreement on how we're balancing cost, quality, and speed. And if you don't, you're probably going to get jammed up most of the time. It's annoying, and it's difficult to force this conversation amongst your peer group because it's a bit granular, and it's a bit, you got to think your way through it. But I'm offering this encouragement that it's worth doing the hard work on that, because 6 months into 2022, somebody's going to come to you with a quality criticism when you guys had agreed at the Q4 planning of 2021 that we're prioritizing the agency cost reduction and cost management, right? And so, like, we're in the middle of the year and you're moving the goalpost on me, right? Now, if you've done the thinking, if you've done the rigor in getting this executive buy-in and alignment established in Q4 of 2021, then you have these conversations to go back to. You hopefully have some emails documenting and confirming that this is what we're committing to as we're going into 2022, so that when the sort of low resolution hand grenade of your strategy sucks, your TA is failing, we're going back, right? What do you mean and how do you know? And let's review what we had discussed and agreed on the balance between cost, quality, and speed. And let's review what the big bets were that we all thought were the right big bets, right? And then let's look at, why do you feel that way? Why are you thinking that? You've most likely got some outcomes that you don't like. You most likely have an understaffed allied health business that snuck up on you and costs are spinning out of control over here. And I get that. That's an emotionally charged, significant issue that must be addressed. But we need more precision if we're going to allocate our resources and energy correctly to not go into the your strategy sucks, and to dig down into what is actually going on. And for us as TA leaders or for us as CHROs to have the ballast and to have the confidence to stand our ground and force the conversation to be targeted towards root cause analysis and resolution, as opposed to current emotional hysteria, which we all get. I do it too. I got a 3-year-old daughter. I haven't even talked about her yet. She can get emotional hysteria going, but you gotta stay sort of grounded as that stuff happens.
I have 3 daughters, Steve, so just, your problems are not even significant.
Yeah, I'm in the JV category right now. So here's a couple examples that we thought we want to continue to try and drive into precision. And as I said at the start, I don't know that your strategy sucks. I don't know that what we're talking about is the right thing for you guys, but we want to be as clear as we can. And we want to give ideas that have structure and that exclude things and include things, so that as you go back and figure out what's right for you and your organization, you're like, okay, well, I disagree with Steve and Chris there, but you know why, right? Hopefully it's not just because you don't like us, but there's something that we said that doesn't fit your environment. And the way that we equip you to go back and criticize our ideas and figure out what your ideas should be is by being precise. And so we wanted to give you a couple examples as well of what we're referring to when we talk about strategic flaws or tactical flaws. Now, when you look at the tactical flaws, I'll remind you, I grew up in the trenches. I got dirt, coal dust under the fingernails. I managed a recruiting desk for 7 years, right? And so I am biased, truly biased towards what it's like to carry 50 requisitions, right? To what it's like to have to, in my environment, I did pharmaceutical recruiting, to do 20 submits a week, right? 50 requisitions in a 50-hour work week is 1 hour per rec per week. What are you going to do in an hour? What do you do in an hour? Probably burn it on a meeting, right? Like an hour per week per rec is a little bit of time. So these are some illustrations.
Yeah, so when we think about what these look like, it's important to try to differentiate as well whether it's a strategic flaw versus a tactical flaw, because those are the questions that you're going to be getting asked, right? And there's some things that we can control here and some things that we can't. So strategic flaw. Steve did there was a great imagery in the last slide around prioritizing cost, yet building a strategy focused on quality, right? Like I don't know that I could even explain that better than he just did. So in that scenario, it's, hey, 6 months in, quality can't be the conversation because cost is the goal, right? Because now we're moving those goalposts again. What a great term. How often have we heard that term over the last 3 years, moving the goalposts? Well, that's like in our new lexicon, Steve. So the other one is prioritizing notional and sentimental successes, such as candidate satisfaction, net promoter score, DEI initiatives, yet building a strategy around measurables and a metrics-first orientation, right? So what that means is we say that we want these the scores related to the softer side of talent acquisition, related to, hey, we want to make sure that people feel good, except we're measuring people on their ability to deliver time, right? And oftentimes when we're forced into measuring ourselves by time, we cut corners because we're trying to get to the outcome that is required of us. Yeah. And so then go ahead, Steve.
Clarify one thing. When we talk about notional and sentimental, we also don't mean unimportant.
Right.
We actually think that these are probably the most important. And they're the most elusive, because if you're on the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you're thinking about safety and security, where your meal's coming from, if you're going to get reamed up by your boss, you're not thinking about the needs of a community or a person that you don't get. You're just not, or at least not well. Or if you're really thinking about how am I going to get the next 40 phone screens done in the next 15 minutes, you're not thinking about candidate experience, right? And so I just wanted to make sure it's clear that when I highlight this strategic flaw being suffocated by a metrics-first analysis of all things, to us, the notional and sentimental is the virtuous, right? It is the thing to be preserved or protected, or to be cautious and understand how the cold, hard steel of metric can sometimes suffocate out these other things that we say that we want to make sure that we're driving and accomplishing. So I just wanted to...
No, I love it. I mean, we run recruiting firms, right? So like, these are very important things. Because measurables and metrics is why we run the businesses that we run. We have to be as effective as we are. But what we really care about for our clients is the ability to deliver candidate satisfaction and NPS. And we want to help you meet the goals. We want to help you meet these softer goals that are just as strategic as metrics-driven goals, right? They should be. But it's about delivering the message in a way that is clear to everyone involved. There are trade-offs whenever we start to look at the strategy and the goals and then what tactics we're using to get there. The nice thing about execution failure is they're a little bit more black and white than strategy failure. Because, like Steve has mentioned, strategy failure is kind of hard to quantify because they're based on low resolution, big bets. And so execution failure, though, we can look at in a very clear way. So like steps in the process. So one of the things that we often see is that there's a lot of useless steps that have been built into the talent acquisition process because we've always done it that way, right? And that phrase gets used a lot in different job functions, but we've always done it that way because candidate applies, we do a phone screen, candidate moves on to the next phase of the process, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we're looking at through the talent acquisition process is how many of those steps have a 90% pass rate? Because if they do, that means that you're inserting a very expensive person to do a step that wasn't ever actually going to change the future anyway, right? So why continue to do something that doesn't change the future? Recs per recruiter. Steve managing those pharmaceutical recs, great example there. But just because the job is hard doesn't actually determine the amount of hours, right? Like you also have to analyze the amount of meetings that people have to sit in. We have recruiters on one particular account that have to sit in on about 6 hours worth of meetings each week. And that means that immediately they only have 34 hours left to do recruiting activities, right? And so how that affects their time to fill and their other metrics that they're being measured upon, those things matter. And so those are the conversations that we have to have both internally and externally. How do we be more effective with our time? So time, quality versus effectiveness is very important. And then finally, this one here. So experienced recruiters performing application reviews. So we have a $100,000 recruiter that is a valued resource to us, but yet we're having them do a job that they were doing when they were a $35,000 recruiter 9 years ago. And they probably don't like doing that job very much, but yet we're forcing that $100,000 person to do that. And to be honest, they're probably not doing it as well as they were doing it 9 years ago, because it's just not something that's a priority to them.
It's soul crushing.
Yeah.
Like this one we put in here like is a little like if you guys haven't like lived depending on how close you are to talent acquisition, it's very easy to think that the problem is we need better experience in our recruiters, right? Like we've got tactical execution issues, we've got outcomes issues. What you need is more expensive, more experienced recruiters. You can inadvertently hire experienced recruiters and put them in soul crushing jobs. Like once you have 10 years experience, if your job is to review 85 applications a day and just you're sucking the life out of that person that's probably worth the big dollars you paid for them, right? But you're not getting any of that value because you just took everything that made them want to jump out of bed in the morning and you like scattered it all over the ground. You don't do that anymore, right? Well, you've got to have role career alignment. What do you need that person to do, and does it fit where they are in their career? And don't think everything's just sort of a money problem. It goes back to the bureaucratic drag thing. Like if somebody thinks that the answer to the problem is put middle management in place, they're probably wrong, right? If somebody thinks that the answer is pay recruiters more, great if your recruiters are underpaid, but don't just think that like a $130,000 recruiter is going to like flourish when you give them 90 applicants to review a day. So why does it matter? I had mentioned earlier we may have a sampling bias. Chris and I get called when things tend to not be going well, right? That could affect our sampling bias. I spend a lot of time, especially in the early days of an engagement, trying to help encourage and give strength and grounding to the executive or the TA leader so that they can stand their ground. Not because there isn't a problem, but because I need backbone and I need courage, because your staff need it, right? As an external consultant, I can add some ballast to you right now, right? But I need to offer you the encouragement that you need and to make sure that you've got the conviction that you require to stand so that you can defend your team. Even if you're wrong, take this for what it's worth. I'd rather see you standing your ground and defending your team slightly off kilter than folding and letting that full avalanche hit your team, right? And so why does it matter is because step one, if you don't do it, who's going to do it? Right? Like, your team needs defending, right? And if they know that they've got the girl before the bull in New York, right? Like, if they know that they've got somebody that's got their back, that's standing out there, just discretionary effort alone, you're going to solve a lot of problems, right? So the first is, your team needs you, and if you don't do it, who's going to do it? The second is, we're executives, and clarity is part of hopefully what we get paid for. Rhetorical nonsense is rhetorical nonsense. It doesn't mean that the person bringing it to you is bad or malicious. Goodness gracious, that's probably not true. But it also doesn't mean that the way that they frame the question or the problem is right. And if you're leading as a CHRO or as a head of talent acquisition, the ball is in your court to inject that clarity. Not to criticize the person, not to belittle the interest, not to dismiss the observation of the outcome failure, but to inject the clarity on how are we going to think about this. That then creates the space for the tactical management. What is it that's going on a day-to-day basis that we actually can address? Did we not provide dry boots? Is there no gunpowder on the front line? Are they hungry? Did we not put enough soldiers out there? What's actually going on that I can address? And we do that because when you defend your staff, when you inject clarity and you make sure the tactical plans are correct, you actually do a better job recruiting, right? I know that we all saw that one coming. But when you do a better job recruiting, you have the staff that you need for your hospital and your health system to do the mission that it's in place to do. Talent acquisition isn't just about recruiting better. It's about staffing organizations that have important missions. And so when we do that right, and when we stand our ground, and when we have clarity with our rhetoric, and when we solve tactical problems well, our hospitals do better. They do more. And not only do we do better and do we do more, all of the stuff that we talk about, I've been in TA a long time, I'm sure you guys have been in TA for a long time, we every year have some soft notional or sentimental objective that we're going to work on. And a lot of them don't go very far, right? They need to. And the reason that they don't go very far is they get suffocated out by the other stuff that's more existentially threatening. Right? Well, we want to focus on our DEI initiatives. We want to focus on candidate experience. We want to focus on onboarding and culture and making sure that the experience you had as a candidate matches the culture that you meet in your first 90 days. We want to do that stuff. But we can't do that stuff when fire alarms are going off and everybody's running around, strategy sucks, and nobody's able to figure out how we're going to sort of stomp out the chaos. We're going to carve out a space to think. We're going to make bets. We're going to offer a thesis. We're going to execute with executive alignment against that thesis, and we're going to stop the chaos cycle so that our hospitals can do their jobs, meet their missions, and that the notional and sentimental objectives that we have in TA can live and not suffocate on Maslow's lowest sort of hierarchy of needs. So.
Thanks, Steve. So, again, so what? The important thing to take away from today is that strategy does not equal outcomes. Strategy is a lot of things, but it's not outcomes. And so clarification amongst your business groups, your leadership, and how you speak to executives about the strategy is important because they're not the same thing. And oftentimes they get lumped into the category of this is the strategy and these are the outcomes. And so making sure that you're reevaluating those, keeping those goalposts where they're supposed to be, and moving towards those, because to Steve's point, those sentimental things, they get lost in about the third week of January, right? And so, but in order to move towards the goal that you're trying to achieve, you have to continue to stay steadfast and towards the desired objectives, using the right tactical motives to get there. So We have a little bit of time left. Looks like maybe about 7 minutes. We'd love to answer, or actually 2 minutes, it looks like. But so questions, we'd be more than happy to take any. If you guys just want to complain, also, we're open to that as well. So any feedback from anyone?
So I love the energy and the overarching message in your presentation. How and what can we provide our leaders as a first step of realizing that they're in the traps that you just spoke about, of the tornado and the spinning?
Yep.
Is there one or two things we can do when we go back that will help them start to realize that they're behaving in that way?
Yeah. So here's two things to consider. One is my experience has been that vivid, logically oriented ideas perform better. That, like, one of the first assessments of an idea that we offer is it coherent, right? And so you've got somebody coming in with, like, the hair on fire and the spinning. If you can meet that energy with a very logical and well-organized thesis, you don't need to be right. And I'm not advocating being wrong, but the first move is precision and clarity and coherence and conviction. Like, have your position. Because if your position is, like, if you get wobbled, well, then the next thing that happens is they sort of, like, attack. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I approached them and they wobbled, so now I'm right that they're not sturdy, right? So the first is coherence and clarity. The second is, with sincerity, try and present things in ways that they can receive them, right? Like, and so depending on who you're hearing from, there's probably something analogical in their department that they can relate to, right? So for example, we know the academic research, especially in this room, on the role that psychological security plays in performance and engagement. We know that when you have better engagement, discretionary effort rises, and when discretionary effort rises, outcomes improve. Like, we know this stuff, right? And so we can take a moment to receive the person, not be wobbled, and then to offer points of view or questions like, so how do we protect the psychological security of our team as we also give them feedback that it's not working right now? You know what I mean? And, like, toss it back to them. And not because you're tricking. We're not tricking. We're just trying to slow down the cycle a little bit so everybody can, right? And then we can agree on a thesis, goals, strategy, tactics, and the investigation of the tactics so that we're not spinning, right? So hopefully that helps.
Thank you all. I appreciate you all being here today. I know
Thanks,
Steve
guys.
does as well. Thank you.
Good to meet you guys.
If you have any questions about strategy, reach out to Steve. His email's right here.
I appreciate that. That wasn't in the version of slides I approved. But I would love to hear from you guys. And in parting, I know we got to roll. This is the first conference I've done since COVID. So in addition to sort of sharing some of this material, I also want to leave you guys with some other material I've not been able to share with anybody. So what's Spider-Man's side hustle? He's a web developer. See, this is what we missed when we were all home, right? So good to meet you guys. Thanks.